Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Oh, let me just grab my water, actually. 1 second. All right. If you're new with us, my name is Phil, one of the pastors here at Hope City. If you have any questions about the church or want to get connected, I'd love to chat with you. Those of you who've been tracking with us, we are continuing our series through the book of Genesis, and today's passage takes us to the beginning of Jacob's spiritual journey. We find at this episode that we're entering into, he has left home for the very first time at age 40. All right, so it's a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey away from home. I don't know how many of you, looking back, how old were you when you kind of first moved out, right? When you first took your first, journey away from home, whether it was for school, you moved out, you lived on campus, right? Or, it was for work, perhaps, right? That took you across the country or even across town or up north, right, for some of us. I remember for me, distinctly, it was the summer of 2006. I was not 40 yet at that time, so I don't feel quite so bad, but I was 25. And I think, talking to my friends who live in the States, they were like, what, you moved out for the very first time at 25? And I was like, yes, shamefully, yes. But that was me, 25. I had just quit the job that I had that I'd been working at since finishing university, and my first kind of step away from home, my first Sam and Frodo experience, if you guys are fans of The Lord of the Rings, right? And they are journeying away from the Shire, and there's this point where Sam says, if I take one step further, this is the furthest I've ever been in my entire life. I can totally relate to that, because at 25, home was Vancouver, family was Vancouver, life was Vancouver, and here I was moving down to Austin, Texas for 3 months, and I was going to do a 3-month youth internship at Travis Christian Assembly. And you might ask, what would make me move down there? Why Austin, Texas? Was it the barbecue? And, sadly, it wasn't the barbecue, although it was amazing and fantastic. Was it the ministry opportunity? And again, it was a wonderful ministry opportunity. I was thinking of going to youth ministry. What better way to get, involved and get experience than to be immersed at a church for 3 months, especially over the summer. But it wasn't the ministry opportunity. Actually, the reason why I moved down to Texas for 3 months was Grace. Because 9 months before I moved, I met her at school here, and a long story short, she ended up moving back home, and I knew I needed to get to know her more, and so creepily, with her her full consent and permission, and again, this was her parents' church that hired me as a youth intern, so all above board, she was on board, I was not just following her to Texas. This was an opportunity for me to get to know her, right, and so that's what I was there for. I was born and raised in Vancouver. This is my first time away from home, and really first time being on my own. And so if you know my life story, born and raised in Vancouver, went to SFU after high school. I didn't go to UBC because UBC was too far from Burnaby. My goodness, right? It was too far from Burnaby, and I could take one bus up to SFU because it was so much closer. And so that's, I don't venture too far from home. Life was Vancouver, family was here, support was here, and then, after SFU, find a job, start seminary, and at seminary meet Grace, and then my life changes, right? And I know I have to start stepping out of what's comfortable, what's known, where support is. And for some of us, this is where growing happens. When we kind of move out, we live on our own. At times, we're used to having the support and the love of our family and our friends, but when we move to a new country, a new city, or even across town, we begin to open ourselves up to depending on God in a way that we never have before. This passage we're exploring today is about that. Jacob is now on his own for the very first time. He's at the start of a journey in which he will encounter God, in which his life will be shaped, and in which his character will begin to grow as he depends on God, as he experiences God. His faith begins to grow. And so a couple questions here. Why did he leave home, right? And why is he on this journey alone? Just a brief summary on the aftermath after this stolen blessing that we talked about last week. So at the end of all that has kind of happened for this family, for Jacob and Esau, for Isaac and Rebekah, we find that Esau is in a place where he is holding a grudge against his brother Jacob. And not only is this something that he feels, he has made concrete plans to live out the grudge that he feels in his heart. And so he has made a plan to kill Jacob after his father dies. He just hates his brother. But Rebekah gets wind of this. And again, I think she has got spies throughout this family empire that they've built. She makes a plan to send Jacob away to her brother Laban. And so we find Esau's holding a grudge. Jacob, on the other hand, he's running. He's running from persecution. He's trying to avoid assassination from his brother, which is a very real physical threat. You know, his brother is an amazing hunter. If he can take down deer and gazelle, easy to take down a human being, right? Maybe even easier. We're so much slower and less sleek than those animals when we're running. And so Jacob is running from persecution. He's running from assassination. He's also running from temptation. There's the official reason for Jacob's journey. His mother and his father send him away, and they send him away, and the official reason is so that he can find a wife who is not of Canaanite origins. Because there's this real temptation to compromise, to adopt the Canaanite lifestyle and their gods. And this would be a real threat to Jacob. It would be a real threat to Abraham's family with regards to their mission and their calling. And so he is running from persecution. He's running from temptation. Maybe he doesn't even understand what he's running from yet. And as the story goes, in summary, Esau gets wind of this, why his brother has been sent away. He begins to get a picture of how much his Canaanite wives have grieved his parents. And what does he do? He doubles down. He goes to Ishmael, actually his father's half-brother and rival, and he goes and he marries Ishmael's daughter. He actually goes and he forms an alliance with his father's rival. Essentially, he is leaving Isaac's family for Ishmael's. So that's the aftermath. That's what happens after the blessing is stolen. Everything kind of blows up. We find Jacob on his own, and this is chapter 28, verses 10 to 11. We pick up here. It reads like this. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Jacob here is at the start of his journey from home. And he finds himself between Beersheba, which is home, and Haran. He finds himself between Beersheba, which if he goes back to, is certain death. Esau will kill him. And he finds himself between that and Haran, where if you read ahead, you know that the life that he enters into once he meets his uncle is pretty miserable as well. It's some sort of servitude and forced labor. His brother wants to kill him. His uncle wants to exploit him. Esau, if we characterize him, is like a lion that if Jacob is caught, he's going to tear him into pieces immediately. That's what Esau will do. Laban is not a lion. Laban is more like a spider. He spins a web, he will ensnare you, and once you are captured, he will suck you dry over the course of years, if not decades. And that's what we read later on. That's what Laban tries to do to Jacob. He is stuck here between a rock and a hard place. He can't go home. He's going to get killed if he does. If he takes steps forward, he moves into an uncertain situation in terms of his future with his uncle. Not a nice guy either. Those of us who've read the story know that this guy Laban, he's family, but there's nothing too low for Laban, right? He'll exploit anyone, even blood. And so Jacob is alone here, maybe for the first time in his life. There's no one in his corner anymore, no one looking out for him. His mom is miles away. She's the only one who had his back. He's facing an uncertain future. He is worried. He's anxious. He now has to take care of himself. He has to protect himself, fight for himself. We find out later he's going to work for his uncle, and his goal there, while he is with his uncle, is to somehow find a wife. And it's into all of this, while Jacob's alone, while Jacob's worried about the future, that God meets him and that God speaks to him. And I want to make it very clear that this dream that Jacob has is God's initiative from beginning to end. You see, Jacob didn't leave home, and at the end of the very first day, while he was feeling alone and overwhelmed, he goes and he sets up an altar and he prays. No, he doesn't. He takes a rock, doesn't make an altar of it. He makes a pillow of it. And he's like, I'm tired. I'm just going to go to sleep. I need rest. He wasn't speaking to God. He didn't ask God to speak to him. There was no effort on Jacob's part. God simply took the initiative. You know, I look at this, and this is good news. This tells us that God will take the initiative with you and me in the moments where we are alone, in the moments where we are overwhelmed. He doesn't wait for us to reach out to him. We don't have to earn an audience with him. We don't have to wait in line. He sees us, he knows what we need, and he makes the first move. He reaches out to us. Verses 12 to 13, the first part of 13. This is the dream that God gives Jacob. He, Jacob, had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord. And I just want to take a moment here and unpack the imagery of the dream, unpack what Jacob sees. First of all, I just want to point out this dream that Jacob has, even though he's experienced all this trauma and all this conflict and all this stress. This dream is not a morbid review of the shameful past, of him stealing something from his brother. That's not what God gives him. This dream also doesn't project into his time with Laban as well. Instead, this dream is a dream where God is giving him a lens in which he is to see his entire life, each present moment, all of his reality. This dream presents and gives him an opportunity to see his new future with God. Jacob is stuck between a shameful past. He is stuck between that and an uncertain future, and it's into that God speaks. Sorry, I'm smiling right now because I see Clarence back there. Clarence, I have to say it because Clarence is one of our elders, and he just ran an ultra marathon, 10 hours, Manning Park, and he made it back. And I'm so happy to see him because last night as he was texting, he was like, I'm not feeling so good. I'm camping. I'm like, after an ultra marathon, you're camping? And he's like, but don't worry, Sherry knows, and I'm going to be okay. And I said, well, make sure you stay with other human beings just in case they need to look out for you. So I'm just incredibly happy to see you. Clarence, well done on the ultra marathon. All right, back to scripture here. Jacob is stuck between this shameful past, stuck between an uncertain future. God is speaking to him. And I consider this pretty amazing given what Jacob and his family have just been through. Because if we're tracking with the big picture of Abraham and Isaac, and now we're looking at Jacob's story, it may seem that at this point of their family history, that the promises that God has made to them, the calling that God has given them, it seems that through all this conflict, perhaps some of it might be lost given all the drama. Some of it might be lost given all the conflict of this current generation. Does it get derailed by all the dysfunction in the family that we see? But in this dream, God speaks, and he speaks again the promises that he made to Abraham, but now he speaks it to Abraham's grandson, Jacob. And this is incredibly encouraging because this tells us that God will not be silenced by conflict and division, whether in our families, whether in our churches, or even in our society. He will speak. God will not be silenced by whether it's violence or even deceit or even exploitation. He will speak. He will speak into our families. He will speak into our churches. He will speak into this moment of history in which you and I are living in right here. That no matter how messy things get, God will speak so that we can live out the future that he has in store for us. The question is, are we listening? So the dream, again, what does Jacob see and what does it mean? Well, he sees a stairway. It's like a long flight of steps, and it's probably most likely a Mesopotamian ziggurat, right? We're looking at something that looks like a pyramid, and on each side of the pyramid, there's steps that go all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. And it says that the stairway, it rests on the earth. And that's significant because it tells us where the stairway begins. The stairway starts in heaven, and the image is that it starts in heaven, and then it extends and stretches all the way from heaven to earth, which is the reverse order of what the humans at the Tower of Babel were trying to do. They were trying to get to heaven. Here, heaven is reaching down to us. And the impression that the narrator wants to give us is that this relationship, this communication from heaven to earth is all the initiative of God. This is God taking the initiative to reach out to Jacob. Jacob also sees that there are angels of God on the stairway. Moving up and down this stairway are angels of God. Jacob meets angels first right here when he leaves home, and later on as he's about to come back home, return home, again he meets an angel, and he has another transformative experience, a naming experience for him. We'll get to that in the weeks ahead. And the angels tell him right off the bat that while he is sleeping in the cold, on the stony ground with just, a rock for a pillow, that he is truly never alone. These angels are the servants of God who protect, they guard, and they communicate with God's people. He is never alone. From the day that he left home to the day that he returns to the promised land, and every day in between, no matter what he is facing, God's servants are with him, protecting, guiding, and guarding him. Something about what the angels are doing as well in terms of what he sees. It says that the angels are ascending and descending down this stairway. This tells us that this stairway is actually this nexus. It's like this connection point or terminal between heaven and earth. It's kind of like Grand Central Station, tons of angelic traffic. All of this angelic traffic, this up and down, it's all official business. And what this tells us, this image of angels coming up and down this stairway, from heaven to earth, and then from earth back to heaven, it tells us that in this world that you and I live in, God's presence may not be visible, but he has been present, he has been at work, sustaining the earth and sustaining humanity even after the fall. He has not abandoned his creation. He is working behind the scenes. That's the big picture. And it tells us that God's presence, even though it's not visible in Jacob's life, or maybe even sometimes in our lives, he is at work in our lives as individuals as well. The image is that of angels ascending and descending. This is an image of God taking care of the land and taking care of Jacob, because the descending angels are angels who are coming onto earth to carry out God's particular will. Whatever particular assignment or mission they've been given in heaven, they are coming down to make that happen here on earth. And the angels that are coming back up to heaven, the ones who ascend, they are returning to heaven after completing a mission that they may give a report to God. This is an image of God being intimately at work, engaged in our lives and in creation itself. And finally, the image of all of this is tied together with the Lord who stands atop this stairway, where he is master of heaven and earth, not just in terms of ownership, but in terms of stewardship. He is the one who oversees the care of his creation and all of his people. This is the image that Jacob saw, but as we know from this passage, he not only sees an image, he hears the Lord God speak to him as well. This is verses 13, second half of 13 to 15. He sees all this, and then this is what God says. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the east and to the west, and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. A couple things just looking into and unpacking what God says here, what he verbalizes. The first thing he does is he identifies himself. He says, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. And this is a pivotal moment because he confirms that the blessing that Isaac gave Jacob, even though it was acquired through deception and trickery, he confirms that this still stands. I honor that. And you must be wondering for Jacob, who's stolen something so valuable, knowing how he acquired it, there must have always been some insecurity as to whether or not this blessing will even ring true in his life. If you know you have something good, but you've stolen it, can you actually ever use it or benefit from it? God goes and he identifies himself and he says it still stands. He roots the blessing in his grandfather's life and his mission. What Jacob receives through his father is the same blessing, the same calling. God is affirming that. God is still with him, even though he stole the blessing. And then he goes and he sets out the conditions of his relationship with Jacob. And he says, I will give. The translation is you don't have to take for yourself anymore. You don't have to manipulate. You don't have to scheme. That's what you did to survive in the past. Allow me to give to you. Allow me to bless you. He is saying, Jacob, I want your entire life and relationship with me to be bound by grace, to be characterized by grace. Salvation is the surprising gift of God. It is not won or gained through manipulation, deception, or even our good effort to earn it. And God says, I will give you the land. This is what I promised Abraham. I will follow through on it. I will give you the land that you are lying on right now. You don't have to scheme. You don't have to manipulate. I will give it to you. The second thing, he says, I will give you descendants. You guys are going to spread out. And this word that they use in the Hebrew is not just a gentle word like people just moving from the city to the suburbs. It's this idea where they are breaking out. It's a destructive force in terms of how they move. It is already hinting at the holy war that God calls them to through Joshua when they enter into the promised land. And then he ties it all together and says, I will give, I will give, I will give. All you have to do is receive. I will give to you so that you may be a blessing to the entire world. Do not forget the bigger picture. You exist not just to receive the blessings, but you exist so that you may be a channel through which I will bless the entire world. Again, this very particular blessing for Jacob leads to a universal blessing for the entire world. And then 3 personal promises. God says to Jacob, I am with you. A translation would be, you are not alone. That God is aware that Jacob is not with his family, that in this moment no one has his back. That when he enters into his uncle's family, he is seen as an outsider, but he wants him to know from the very outset, you are not alone. I am with you in places of threat. I am with you in places of uncertainty. I am with you when others come against you. I will bind myself to you. This promise holds all the other promises together, that God will be with Jacob and with his people, and with us. The second promise, I will watch over you. I will protect you. My kids are all in school right now. Kayla last year started kindergarten, and she walked into kindergarten with swagger, okay? But that's Kayla to begin with, but I think she walked into kindergarten with swagger because she was pumped that her big brother Micah was at her school, and she knew that Micah would only be with her for 1 year through all the academic journeying that they're going to do, whether it's through high school or elementary school, high school or university. Because of the age gap, she only gets 1 year with her big brother, unless Micah decides to fail school, in which there's a chance that they can continue this relationship, right? But Kayla was pumped about having Micah there because for her first year of kindergarten, when your big brother is in grade 7, when your big brother is one of the most respected kids at the school, no one messes with you. And I think at times she might have taken that a little too far. We had to tell her to dial it down a little bit. Remember, you're still kindergarten. You can't use Micah like that. I will watch over you. She knew she had someone who had her back and looked out for her. This is just a microcosm of what God is promising Jacob. I will protect you. I will watch out for you. No one will come after you. And if they do, they will know that I have your back. The final promise, I will bring you back. You are far from home right now. You don't know where this journey is going to take you. You're going to spend years, if not decades, in a place where you do not want to be. But I will bring you back. You will come home. I will get you back to where you belong. He didn't want to go on this trip. His parents initiated this journey for him, this departure from Canaan for him. You might have wondered why they couldn't have just done the same for Jacob, what they did for Isaac. That Isaac and Rebekah could have sent a servant to Laban, bearing gifts, just like Abraham did for Isaac, to find a wife to bring back. If they've done it before, why didn't they do it now? Well, we know because of the potential for assassination for Jacob, why he can't stay at home. But Jacob must be wondering, why me? Why do I have to go on this trek? His parents initiated his departure from Canaan. God is saying, I will determine and direct and orchestrate your return. It is part of the plan. I promise you, you will come home. I think about what this means for us as human beings as well. When it comes to you and I and our life journey, our beginning, and also our end, that God is saying, I will make sure that you come home, that you come home to me. That he not only has the beginning of our journey charted for us, but he has the last days, our homecoming, planned as well. And he will take care of those last days. God says, I will not leave you. Again, this is not a new promise. It's merely an echo of the first promise. He says, I am with you. I will not leave you. A negative expression of the first promise. You see, all the gods of the nations in the ancient Near East, they were all limited by geography to a particular land. They all had physical boundaries that they could not cross. And I think God says this. He emphasizes again, not only am I with you, but I will never leave you, no matter how far you go or where you end up. Just to ease Jacob's mind as he begins this journey, as to whether or not the God of his fathers will be with him wherever he goes. He's saying, this is the God of heaven and earth. All of this is his. But more than that, he's able to go wherever he wants, but he is faithful. He has bound himself to Jacob. Verses 16 to 17. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of Jacob. This is the gate of heaven. Jacob's first response to this dream is just purely awe. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. We see Jacob embracing the promises of this dream. The world that he saw in this dream, the image, is now a lens through which he sees and will experience all of his reality. That no matter what he goes through, what's ahead of him, something he's looking forward to or something he fears, he looks at it through this lens of the angels ascending and descending, the angels around him, and the God who sits at the very top. He says, I was not aware. Often, I'm going to be honest with you, we only see God's presence and work in our lives when we look back. In the moment, it is chaos. In the moment, life is happening too fast. In the moment, we feel out of control. In the moment, we are overwhelmed. And somehow, when we have a chance later on to look back, we see how God's presence, his work, how he orchestrated, he was there. Jacob is saying, I was not aware. I think we resonate with that. The second thing that he responded to is with fear. And this might be strange for us. But I don't think he was afraid for his life when he saw what he saw. I think what happened was his reverence for God, his respect for God, it grew. He started to see how big God was. And at the same time, as we see that, he began to see and realize how small he was as a human being, how vulnerable he was as a human being, and how much he needed this God who had his back. This is a worshipful fear in God's presence. That somehow what replaces his fear of his brother is now this respect and this fear of God. And then he goes and he exclaims, how awesome is this place? This place here, this place where I just decided to sleep for the night, this insignificant, unidentified place is now the house of God. This is a temple, and I had no idea. verses 18 to 19. The story goes on. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called the place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Jacob's response to this dream is to take the pillow, the rock that he used as a pillow, and maybe instead of lying flat, he turns it up now. And he makes a pillar, a single pillar, one single upright stone, as a monument to remember and honor the encounter with God and of God's promises being spoken over him. He goes and he consecrates it. This is not any stone. This is this particular stone. It is set apart to mark this encounter, and he consecrates it. He sets it apart by pouring oil on it. And then he goes and he names this place where he has encountered God, Bethel, which is the house of God. And Scripture tells us that this place, this region, used to contain a very large Canaanite city. And that over time, what is remembered is not the city and the civilization that human beings have built, but just this single rock that a man has decided to remember God by, his promises by. That it is so simple just to take a rock, erect it, and then pour oil on it. And somehow that memory, that encounter has surpassed all that we can achieve through our civilization and accomplishments. And so I want to ask you, in your journey, in what you've experienced of God and how he has encountered you in terms of the promises that he's spoken over you, how has he met you? How has he surprised you? How has he rescued you? How has he spoken to you? And how have you marked that day or that place? Do you remember where you were when you encountered God for the first time? Do you remember where you were when you felt and knew deep within that you were loved by God, that he will have your back and care for you? How did you mark that? The story goes on. This is verses 20 to 22. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I will return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth." Jacob's response to God's promises is to make a promise of his own in response, is to make a vow. In fact, the vow that we find here from Jacob is the longest vow in the entire Old Testament. But what are vows? I think Walter Brueggemann says it best, and this is an Old Testament scholar, and he's a poet. He's a man who speaks words of truth through theology. And this is what he comes up with in terms of vows. He says, vows are not contracts. They're not limited agreements, but they're yieldings that reorient life. When we promise God something, we are yielding. We are surrendering our will to his. And in some way, when we do that, our entire life, our priorities, our goals, it gets shifted according to what God wants to do with our lives. When we encounter God, we make vows, we make promises to yield, reorient our lives around who he is and what he's doing. It's easy to read this, and in the language that we read, think that Jacob is trying to bargain with God, that he is trying to negotiate with God. But God has already promised to be with him. He's promised to watch over him. He's promised to bring him back home when his time in Paddan Aram is done. Jacob is committing his life to God and his promises through this vow. He is responding to God's promise by making one of his own. And this promise begins to shape, this vow begins to shape Jacob's entire journey. This journey that began as running away to escape assassination. It started as a journey to find a wife that is suitable according to his parents. This journey started originally when he was running from persecution and running from temptation. But now Jacob's journey becomes a pilgrimage. This is going to be a journey that will shape his life and his character for the particular mission and calling that God has given him and to his family. He is now promising, vowing to live for something bigger than himself. And so what does this look like for us today? Do you and I, are we called to make vows with God today? And I think yes, in the sense that when we respond to God's promises, we respond by committing to his promises. Not in the sense that we are trying to make vows to get God to bend to our will or to do something we want for us. That is not how he works. We don't have to negotiate or bargain with God to get God to be good to us. God initiates goodness with us. He speaks his promises to us. Rather, when we come to God in prayer, we can simply ask and present all our needs before him and trust that he will do what is good because he is good. But when it comes to us making vows to God, that is always in response to his promises to us. We are merely communicating and affirming our commitment to follow him and to want what he wants in our lives. Jacob follows this up and he says, I will give you a tenth. He will give God 10%. And we might not think much of this, but you have to remember the journey that Jacob has been on. Jacob's promise of a tithe marks an important part of his transformation. This is a journey of transformation from someone who came out of the womb grasping, holding on, not letting go. He is holding on, he is grasping, he is manipulating, he is deceiving, he is doing everything he can to hold on to something, whether it is a birthright or whether or not it's a blessing. And this comes from a place where he is saying, there is not enough. I need to get mine. I cannot afford to let something go. I need to hold on. I need to grasp. That's his name, one who grasps the heel. But he starts here after he makes a vow, and he makes a vow to God. He says, I will give you a tenth. He goes from someone who is grasping, unable to let go, to someone who is going to learn how to let go and give back and give to, because he will experience God's ridiculous blessing on his life, where God will give him so much that it's going to be clear to him there is more than enough to live out of that kind of security, that kind of confidence. And this is why you and I, as followers of Jesus, followers of the living God, we give back as well. We give back to God and back to those in need. And we give because we're acknowledging that everything we have belongs to him. Everything that we have has been given. And he's the actual owner. We are merely stewards. And we're given what we have, not just for our survival, but for his deeper purposes in terms of what he's doing with our world. That's why we practice what we practice when we come and we worship. That giving is a spiritual practice, because unless we learn to unclench our fists and let go and give back to God, unfortunately what happens is the things that he gives us, we hold on to, and they hold on to us as well. and we are bound by them. And the blessing that he gives us can so easily become a curse. This is a practice. The practice of giving is deeply spiritual. It helps us release the things that hold on to us so they don't become a curse to us. Looking at Jacob's journey here, when God meets us, we will never be the same. Transformation has begun for Jacob here. Begins with this encounter with God. When God shows up, a man who's running away from home ends up running into God. When God shows up, a man who is afraid of his brother begins to fear and respect God instead. When God shows up, a random place where you are just resting for the night on a long journey away from home somehow becomes the house of God, a safe house of sorts for his people, where God's agents are working day and night to protect you. When God shows up, a simple rock in the middle of a desert becomes a temple. And when God shows up, Jacob, the grasper, the trickster, will one day become Israel, one who prevails with God and humans and has overcome. Let me pray. Lord, we come before you. We're at different stages of our journey. Some of us are just starting out, beginning things. Others of us are just in the middle. Sometimes we don't know which side is closer. Is it the beginning or is it the end? It's just hard. Others of us are towards the end of a journey. We've learned to walk with you. We've seen you at work in our lives. We know much of you through our time with you. And still we seek you in the days ahead. God, I ask on behalf of our people, that you would encounter us, meet with us. That you would help us to see our lives, our journey, and our purpose. Would you reveal yourself as the one who is with us, the one who will watch over us, and the one who will bring us safely home? Lord, continue to shape us and transform us the same way you shaped and transformed Jacob. We seek your transformation that we may be a blessing to the world. Amen.